They fired me just 3 days after I completed the system that saved their company from bankruptcy. 3 months later, they paid me triple just to avoid shutting down. Want to know how a single engineer can turn a giant into a hostage? Listen to the end, and you'll understand why you should never underestimate the quietest person in the meeting room. My name is Erin Matthews. I'm 34, an automation systems engineer with an electrical engineering degree. And I run a small equipment repair business out of my garage when I'm not solving corporate America's problems. This is the story of how I brought a logistics giant to its knees without saying a single angry word. It was never my intention to become the puppet master behind Axis Logic Solutions' survival. When I joined the company 4 years ago, I was just looking for stability after years of freelancing. Axis Logics was impressive on paper, one of America's largest logistics operations. With warehouses across 48 states and partnerships with every major retailer you can name. Their offices in downtown Chicago sparkled with glass and chrome. And their mission statement about revolutionizing supply chain management through cutting-edge technology sounded promising to someone like me who lived for solving complex systems problems. The reality proved quite different. On my first day, I discovered their cutting-edge technology was a patchwork of legacy systems from 3 different decades, held together with digital duct tape and prayer. Their warehouse floors ran on equipment that belonged in a museum, not in a company claiming to be at the forefront of logistics innovation. The manager who hired me, Derek Winters, seemed relieved when I didn't immediately quit after seeing the mess I'd inherited. Previous consultants said it would take a complete rebuild. He confessed during my orientation tour, gesturing at a server room that looked like it had been wired by a frantic octopus. Corporate won't approve that kind of budget. We just need someone who can keep it running until next quarter's numbers improve. I nodded, already mentally cataloging the outdated components and system vulnerabilities. What Derek didn't know was that I had already developed a proprietary system, PulseCore, that could revolutionize operations like this. I'd created it during my freelance days. A modular, adaptive control system that could synchronize and optimize almost any industrial operation. I'd been looking for the right testing ground, and Axis Logics, despite its flaws, had the scale I needed. I might have some ideas, was all I said. The company structure was a textbook example of middle management bloat. Between me and the CEO stood 7 layers of directors, vice presidents, and team leads, each more concerned with claiming credit than solving problems. My immediate supervisor, Vince Pearson, spent more time preparing PowerPoint presentations about productivity than actually allowing his team to be productive. Erin, we need you to focus on maintaining current operations, he told me repeatedly whenever I suggested improvements. Innovation initiatives come from the strategy team. The strategy team, as far as I could tell, consisted of MBA graduates who couldn't tell a circuit board from a cutting board. For 6 months, I played by their rules. I patched their systems, documented their processes, and built relationships with the floor workers, the people who actually kept Axis Logics functioning. Carlos in shipping, Diane in receiving, Marcus in inventory. These were the ones who understood the true operational challenges. While management debated buzzwords in climate-controlled conference rooms, these workers sweated through 12-hour shifts, fighting with equipment that constantly failed them. If these conveyor sensors were any dumber, we'd have to water them. Marcus joked one day as we troubleshot yet another sorting system failure. 3rd time this week, the South Quadrant's gone down. I stayed late that night, long after my shift ended, mapping the entire warehouse network. The problem wasn't just outdated equipment, it was the lack of coordination between systems. Each section operated in isolation, creating bottlenecks and failure points throughout the process. What they needed was an integrated solution. That weekend, I brought in my PulseCore prototype. It was a risk. I hadn't cleared it with management, and technically, I was introducing unauthorized technology into their network. But after months of watching workers struggle with preventable problems, I couldn't stand by any longer. "What's that?" Marcus asked when he saw me installing the small black box near the main control panel. "Just a diagnostic tool," I replied. It wasn't entirely a lie. might help us identify what's causing the sensor failures. I connected PulseCore to a non-critical section of the warehouse operations, one that wouldn't disrupt the main workflow if something went wrong. The system was designed to learn operational patterns, identify inefficiencies, and gradually introduce optimizations without human intervention. For 2 weeks, I monitored its performance while maintaining my regular duties. The results were immediate. Sensor failures in the south quadrant dropped by 78%. Processing speeds increased by 22%. Error rates plummeted. Marcus and his team noticed the difference right away. "Whatever voodoo you worked on those sensors, keep it up," he said, showing me the weekly performance metrics. "Management's actually getting off our backs for once." Vince noticed too, though in his typical fashion, he assumed it was due to his latest motivational initiative, rather than any technical improvement. "See, Aaron? The system works fine when people follow proper protocols," he said, taking credit for the improvements during our department meeting. "We just needed to reinforce the training." I said nothing. The success of the South Quadrant gave me the confidence to expand. Over the next 3 months, I gradually integrated PulseCore into more sections of the warehouse, always careful to make the changes seem like routine maintenance. By the 6-month mark, 40% of the facility was running on my system, and productivity metrics were setting new records. That's when upper management started paying attention. Quarterly reports showed a significant improvement in the Chicago warehouse's performance compared to other facilities. The regional director, Sandra Knowles, scheduled a visit to see what was happening. "We need to make a good impression," Vince told our team the day before her arrival. "Everyone stay on task, and let's showcase our standard operations." Sandra arrived with an entourage of corporate analysts, all armed with tablets and questioning expressions. As Vince led them through the warehouse, proudly pointing out improvements he had nothing to do with, I noticed one analyst hanging back, studying the control systems with actual interest. "These response times aren't consistent with the equipment listed in the asset registry," she said when she caught me watching her. "What modifications have you made?" Her name was Lydia Park, and unlike most of the corporate visitors, she actually understood operations technology. I hesitated before answering. Revealing PulseCore meant admitting I'd implemented unauthorized changes, but her technical question suggested she'd figure it out eventually. "I've integrated a custom control system," I admitted. "It coordinates operations across multiple zones." Lydia's eyes widened. "Show me." For the next hour, while Vince continued his dog and pony show for Sandra, I walked Lydia through PulseCore's architecture. I explained how it learned from operational patterns, predicted maintenance needs, and optimized workflow in real time. Unlike other visitors who glazed over at technical details, Lydia asked insightful questions that showed she grasped the system's potential. "This is revolutionary," she said finally. "Why isn't this being implemented company-wide?" I shrugged. Middle management prefers incremental improvements they can take credit for. Complete overhauls make them nervous. Lydia made notes on her tablet. "Sandra needs to see this. The company's been looking for exactly this kind of solution." My stomach tightened. I'd prefer to keep developing it gradually. The system works because I've been able to calibrate it carefully without pressure from above. "Too late," Lydia said, nodding toward the approaching group. "Sandra's already impressed with the numbers. When she learns what's behind them..." What followed was a whirlwind. Sandra, it turned out, had been brought in specifically to find innovations that could be scaled across all Axis Logic's facilities. The company was losing market share to more technologically advanced competitors, and the board was pressuring leadership for solutions. "This PulseCore system," Sandra said after Lydia's explanation. "Is it proprietary to Axis Logic's?" Before I could answer, Vince jumped in. "Of course, it's a project our team has been developing under my direction for the past year." I stared at him, stunned by the blatant lie. Lydia caught my eye, her expression questioning, but I remained silent. This wasn't the place for a confrontation. Over the next week, Vince was suddenly my biggest fan. After months of dismissing my suggestions, he now wanted daily briefings on PulseCore. Sandra had apparently reported the breakthrough to corporate headquarters, and executives were interested. "We need documentation, presentations, the works," Vince told me. "This could be huge for the department, for both our careers," he added with a wink that made my skin crawl. I provided technical specifications but deliberately omitted key architectural elements. PulseCore wasn't just hardware and code, it was my intellectual property. Developed before I joined Axis Logix, refined on my own time. I'd never signed it over, and no one had asked me to. 3 weeks after Sandra's visit, I received an email requesting my presence at headquarters for a special project briefing. Vince was ecstatic. "This is it. They're going to greenlight the company-wide implementation," he said, already imagining his promotion. The meeting room at headquarters contained more executives than I'd seen in my entire tenure at Axis Logix. The CEO, William Garrett, sat at the head of the table, flanked by his executive team. Sandra and Lydia sat nearby, along with representatives from finance and legal. Vince and I were directed to seats at the far end. William opened with corporate pleasantries before getting to the point. "We understand you've developed a system that's revolutionized our Chicago operations. PulseCore, is it?" All eyes turned to me, but Vince answered first. "Yes, sir. It's been a team effort, but as department head, I've overseen the project from concept to implementation." I watched in disbelief as Vince presented PulseCore as if it were his brainchild, using technical language he barely understood. Occasionally, he'd defer to me for specific details, but the narrative was clear. This was an Axis Logix innovation, conceived and developed under proper channels. When he finished, William turned to me. "Ms. Matthews, as the lead engineer, what timeline do you envision for company-wide implementation?" I took a deep breath. This was my moment to set the record straight, to claim ownership of my creation. But looking around the table, I saw the political reality. These executives didn't care who created PulseCore, they wanted the results it promised. Challenging Vince meant creating conflict, potentially delaying implementation, and possibly losing my job. Full implementation would take approximately 2 years, I said carefully. The system requires customization for each facility's unique operations. 2 years? The CFO frowned. "Our competitors will eat us alive in that time frame." "We could prioritize highest volume facilities first," I suggested. "Create a phased approach." The meeting continued for hours, with executives debating implementation strategies, budget allocations, and market positioning. Not once did anyone question the ownership of PulseCore or suggest additional compensation for its creation. I was, after all, just an employee doing her job. As we left headquarters, Vince was jubilant. "They loved it. Project approval is practically guaranteed. There's talk of a special innovation bonus for the department." "For the department or for you?" I asked quietly. He gave me a sharp look. "We're all on the same team here. Aaron, everyone benefits from the company's success." Over the next 6 months, I worked tirelessly to expand PulseCore across Axis Logix's network. I traveled to warehouses around the country, customizing the system for each location, training local technicians, and gradually building a comprehensive operational framework. The results were consistent. Productivity up, errors down, costs reduced. Corporate communications began featuring PulseCore in investor presentations and industry publications. A promotional video showcased the revolutionary in-house technology developed by Axis Logix's innovation team. The video included interviews with Vince, Sandra, and William, but not a single mention of my name. When I pointed this out to Vince, he shrugged. "Marketing needed recognizable faces. Besides, you've never seemed comfortable in the spotlight." He was right about that, at least. I preferred solving problems to talking about solving them. But as PulseCore gained recognition throughout the industry, the erasure of my contribution became increasingly difficult to ignore. The final straw came during the annual industry conference in Las Vegas. Axis Logix had a prominent booth showcasing their technological transformation. With PulseCore as the centerpiece, Vince gave a keynote presentation titled "Revolutionizing Logistics Through Proprietary Innovation." complete with technical specifications I'd written but never authorized for public disclosure. I watched from the audience as he accepted an Industry Innovation Award, thanking his dedicated engineering team without naming a single person. That night, at the company celebration dinner, I was seated at a table far from the executives, while Vince and his new innovation team, none of whom had contributed to PulseCore, enjoyed premium champagne at the head table. Lydia found me at the bar later, nursing a whiskey and contemplating my future. "You know, you could speak up," she said, sliding onto the stool beside me. "Make it clear whose work they're celebrating." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "Would it matter? The company narrative is already established." "It might if you had proof of prior development," she said carefully. "Documentation predating your employment at Axis Logics." Our eyes met, and I realized she'd figured it out. "What makes you think such documentation exists?" Lydia smiled. "The architecture is too cohesive, too elegant to have been developed piecemeal within Axis Logics' bureaucracy. This is something you brought with you, isn't it?" I didn't confirm or deny, but my silence was answer enough. "You should protect yourself," she advised. "Corporate is discussing a public stock offering with PulseCore as the centerpiece. The valuation implications are significant." She was right, of course. I'd been so focused on making the system work that I'd neglected to protect my interests. That night in my hotel room, I reviewed my options. I could confront management, demand recognition and compensation for my intellectual property. But given the corporate culture at Axis Logics, that approach seemed doomed to failure. Instead, I made 3 key decisions. First, I would document everything: my original development work, the implementation process at Axis Logics, and all communications regarding PulseCore. Second, I would register Matthews TechWorks LLC as the official owner of the PulseCore intellectual property. And third, I would build in a security protocol that only I could control. Upon returning from the conference, I worked nights and weekends to execute my plan. Matthews TechWorks was established with proper legal documentation. I filed patents covering key aspects of PulseCore's architecture under my LLC, not my personal name, to avoid triggering Axis Logics' employment agreement clauses. And I implemented a subtle but critical update to all PulseCore installations, a heartbeat protocol that required periodic authentication from a server I controlled. The heartbeat wasn't malicious. It wouldn't damage data or systems if it failed. It would simply cause PulseCore to gradually reduce functionality, reverting systems to their pre-implementation state over 30 days. This provided ample time for regular maintenance or authentication issues to be resolved without operational impact. It was a standard security practice in many enterprise systems, though not one I'd discussed with Axis Logics management. 3 weeks after implementing these measures, I was called into a meeting with HR and Vince. The atmosphere was tense as I took a seat in the small conference room. "Aaron," the HR representative began, "as you know, Axis Logics is undergoing organizational restructuring to align with our technological transformation." I nodded, already suspecting where this was heading. "Your contributions to our systems have been valuable," she continued, reading from a prepared statement. "However, as we move from implementation to maintenance phase, we're consolidating our engineering resources." "You're firing me," I said, cutting through the corporate jargon. Vince at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Not firing, restructuring. Your position is being eliminated, but we're offering a standard severance package." The standard package was 2 weeks' pay with immediate termination. No recognition for PulseCore, no bonus for the millions in operational savings my system had already generated. Not even a proper notice period. "I see," was all I said. I signed the paperwork without argument, handed over my company badge, and allowed security to escort me to my desk to collect personal items. Neither Vince nor anyone from the executive team came to say goodbye. By lunchtime, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, 4 years of work reduced to a cardboard box of desk plants and coffee mugs. I drove home in a strange state of calm. This outcome, while sooner than expected, wasn't entirely surprising. Axis Logics had gotten what they wanted from me, a fully implemented system transforming their operations, and now they were cutting costs before their stock offering. It was cold, calculated business logic. What they didn't know was that I had been equally calculating. At home, I opened my laptop and checked the PulseCore network. All systems were functioning normally, as they would for the next 30 days until the first heartbeat authentication was required. I drafted a formal letter from Matthews TechWorks LLC to Axis Logics' legal department, outlining the licensing terms for continued use of PulseCore technology. The monthly fee, $75,000, was triple my former salary, but a fraction of the value PulseCore provided to Axis Logics operations. The letter included documentation of my ownership, patent applications, and a clear explanation of the authentication protocol. I sent it via certified mail, then waited. For 2 weeks, there was no response. Axis Logics proceeded with their operations, likely assuming that PulseCore was their property, developed on their time with their resources. Their press releases continued to tout their proprietary technology and in-house innovation. On day 15 after my termination, I received a cease and desist letter from Axis Logics' legal team, demanding I discontinue false claims of ownership over company intellectual property and threatening litigation for corporate espionage. I forwarded the letter to my attorney without comment. We had anticipated this response and prepared accordingly. My lawyer responded with documented evidence of PulseCore's development predating my employment at Axis Logics, along with properly filed patents and trademark registrations. The message was clear. Axis Logics could negotiate a licensing agreement or face both legal challenges and the technical consequences of authentication failure. Another 2 weeks passed. The first signs of system degradation began appearing in Axis Logics warehouses. Nothing dramatic, just slight delays in processing. Occasional synchronization errors, minor inefficiencies that gradually accumulated. To workers like Marcus, it probably seemed like the system was simply having bad days. To management reviewing performance metrics, however, the decline would be noticeable. I monitored public channels for news about Axis Logics. Their stock offering was scheduled for the following quarter, with investor roadshows beginning in 3 weeks. Timing that coincided perfectly with the point at which PulseCore degradation would become impossible to ignore. On day 27, I received a call from an unknown number. Ms. Matthews? This is William Garrett, CEO of Axis Logics. I think we need to talk. His tone was controlled but tense. I matched it with professional detachment. I believe our respective legal teams are already in communication, Mr. Garrett. Let's set the lawyers aside for a moment, he said. We seem to have a misunderstanding about PulseCore's ownership. There's no misunderstanding on my part, I replied. Matthews TechWorks owns the intellectual property rights to PulseCore. Axis Logics has been using it without a proper licensing agreement. You developed it while employed by us, he countered. I refined it while employed by you. The core architecture and initial development preceded my employment, as my documentation demonstrates. He paused, and I could almost hear him recalculating his approach. Our systems have been experiencing irregularities. Your letter mentioned an authentication protocol, a standard security feature in enterprise software. I explained. Without proper licensing, the system will gradually revert to pre-implementation functionality. You're holding our operations hostage, he said, anger finally breaking through his professional veneer. I'm protecting my intellectual property, I corrected. Axis Logics terminated my employment without notice after benefiting from my innovation. Now you can either license the technology properly or develop an alternative. The call ended with William promising to have his team review the situation. 3 days later, as system degradation accelerated, I received another call, this time from Sandra Knowles. The technical team can't stabilize the system, she said without preamble. How quickly can you resolve the authentication issues? As soon as a licensing agreement is executed, I replied. My terms haven't changed. $75,000 per month is excessive, she argued. Axis Logix's quarterly report cited $3.2 million in operational savings directly attributed to Pulse Core. I countered, my fee represents less than 10% of that value. Most technology licensing agreements range from 15 to 30%. Sandra was silent for a moment. There's another issue. We have a major contract pending with Western Freight. The partnership hinges on our technological capabilities we're rapidly losing. That sounds like a compelling reason to resolve our licensing discussion quickly. I said. The negotiation continued for another week. Axis Logix attempted to find workarounds, bringing in external consultants to reverse engineer Pulse Core's architecture or develop temporary alternatives. These efforts failed, not because of any sabotage on my part, but because the system's complexity required intimate knowledge of its design principles. As warehouse operations deteriorated, delays cascaded through Axis Logix's supply chain. Clients began reporting shipment errors and missed deadlines. Industry publications noted that Axis Logix was experiencing unexpected technical challenges just weeks before their planned stock offering. On day 34, with Pulse Core functionality reduced to 60% and warehouse operations in disarray, William Garrett requested an in-person meeting. I agreed to meet at my attorney's office, not Axis Logix headquarters. William arrived with Sandra and the company's chief legal officer. The atmosphere was tense but respectful, a significant change from my termination meeting. We've reviewed your documentation, William began. While we still maintain that substantial development occurred during your employment, we recognize the core innovation preceded your time with us. I nodded but remained silent. We're prepared to offer a licensing agreement, he continued, $50,000 per month, with a 2-year commitment. My terms remain unchanged, I replied, $75,000 monthly, with quarterly adjustments based on the system's coverage and utilization. Additionally, all public communications regarding Pulse Core must acknowledge Matthews TechWorks as the technology provider. William frowned. That contradicts our previous market positioning, which was based on inaccurate ownership claims. My attorney interjected. The negotiation continued for hours. By the end, we had reached an agreement. Axis Logix would license Pulse Core from Matthews TechWorks at $75,000 monthly for the first year, with scheduled increases based on expanded implementation. All future development would be contracted through my company, with clear attribution in technical documentation and investor materials, and I would provide 6 months of exclusive consulting to ensure system stability. The contract was signed the following day. Within hours, I restored full authentication to all Pulse Core installations, and warehouse operations began normalizing. The Western Freight contract proceeded, though Axis Logix delayed their stock offering by 1 quarter to refine their technological infrastructure. 3 weeks later, I returned to the Axis Logix Chicago warehouse, not as an employee, but as an independent contractor. Marcus greeted me with a knowing smile as I passed through security. Figured they'd have to bring you back, he said. Place went to hell after you left. In the server room, I connected my laptop to the main control node. A few keystrokes later, all performance indicators returned to optimal levels. The system I'd built, the system they'd claimed as their own, responded to my commands like an old friend. Vince avoided me during my visits, suddenly too busy for the meetings he once insisted upon. Sandra became my primary contact, and our professional relationship evolved into something approaching mutual respect. You could have destroyed us, she admitted during one of our review sessions. Why didn't you? I considered the question carefully. Destroying Axis Logix wouldn't have served anyone, not the workers who depend on these jobs, not the clients who need reliable logistics, not even me. I wanted recognition for my work and fair compensation, not revenge. She nodded slowly. A lesson in valuing the quiet ones in the room. 1 year later, Matthews TechWorks had expanded to a team of 5 engineers, providing specialized logistics automation solutions to companies across North America. Axis Logix remained our largest client, though our relationship had evolved into a more balanced partnership. Their stock offering eventually proceeded successfully, with investor materials accurately describing their strategic technology partnership with Matthews TechWorks. Occasionally, I'd run into Vince at industry events. He'd nod stiffly before finding reasons to be elsewhere. His promised promotion never materialized. The executive team had little use for someone who claimed credit for innovation but couldn't deliver when it mattered. William Garrett retired the following year, citing a desire to explore new opportunities. In his departure interview with an industry publication, he offered this advice to emerging logistics companies. Technological innovation isn't just about systems and software, it's about the people who create them. Recognize and reward your true innovators, or someone else will. I keep that quote framed in my office, next to the first licensing check from Axis Logics, not as a reminder of victory, but as a lesson in valuing one's own worth. They thought they could discard me after extracting what they needed, never realizing that true innovation isn't something you can simply take. It belongs to those who create it. They fired me 3 days after I completed the system that saved their company from bankruptcy. 3 months later, they paid me triple just to avoid shutting down. The quietest person in the meeting room turned out to be the one they couldn't afford to lose. My name is Erin Matthews, and this is how I taught a logistics giant that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about respecting the minds behind it.